Just making a little test there. So we're coming up to five past the hour. Even as people continue to join us, I'm going to start making a little bit of a formal introduction. Um, so that will ease up a little bit of the time as people come in. So I said in the outset, just to make sure that we can manage some of the security threats to these kind of platforms, we really do ask that you all keep yourselves muted. If and when there's a chance to come in for questions, that'll be a hands up and requesting to unmute yourself. So just leave everything muted for the moment. If you have sufficient bandwidth for cameras, absolutely. If we run into any issues with that moving forward, we'll let you know. It's always great to have a moment of seeing faces of people who are actually in the room. Um, so we're coming up now for 2 days of really solid, substantive discussions about counterterrorism in Africa. And I wanted to start out by welcoming you on behalf of the Horn of Africa Peace and Security Institute, particularly on behalf of our director, whose vision is what has brought us all together today. But the team that we're starting to build, or that we have built, is also really important to acknowledge. So we have an amazing director of programs who not only has made sure that all of the logistics of having us here, but a lot of the substance of what we do is really moving forward. Presentations that he made this week in Mogadishu at the Civil Society Organization Forum were really impressive. We are building an amazing team of country representatives. So many of you will now find a Horn of Africa Institute of Peace and Security representative in your country. We have in Kenya and Ethiopia, and we're onboarding a representative for Sudan at the moment. So that's been a real strengthening. Um, Most of you will know about our peace talks. So every week we try to have a peace talk that covers one of the core issues that the Institute is focused on. And we have two amazing peace talk coordinators who are doing all of the heavy lifting to make that work possible. So we thank them very much as well. Um, and we'll talk more about them and some of the activities of the Institute over the next 2 days. But getting a little bit into the substance of today, this is going to be, as I said, a 2 day virtual workshop on counterterrorism in the Horn of Africa. I want to continue in framing that. Um, we as an institute are headquartered in Mogadishu, as well as having this presence across the Horn of Africa and globally. But I think it's really important, because of where we're headquartered, to acknowledge the support of the African Union mission in Somalia. And we're really honoured that the special representative will try to join us tomorrow to say some words. We've been really privileged to have the support of the federal government of Somalia through their Tubsan Centre. And again, their deputy director opened up one of our most recent peace talks. So that framing is really important to us. Professor Rowan and I were discussing today that the the impacts of terrorism internationally, as well as very much in the region, are happening daily. And we need to acknowledge that. We need to show respect to the people that have sacrificed so much, because they're there to protect us. And that's very often our military, our police, but a lot of our civilian populations as well. We need to acknowledge the enormous loss that communities have because of terrorist actions. And that's at their most violent, as well as at denying them freedom of movement, denying them development, making really negative impacts into the financial systems that allow families to have a prosperity and a future. Today, I wanted to acknowledge particularly, though, a hero, a positive story, if you like. Many of you will have seen that there was a major attack, a terrorist incident in Australia yesterday, which is my home country. And I really want to acknowledge by name um, Ahmed Al Ahmed, who was the hero who, unarmed, tackled to the ground one of the armed men who was shooting into an enormous crowd. He himself was then shot several times by the other gunman. But without then naming all of the other heroes we have, I want to just bring his name forward as somebody. As an Australian, I'm so proud to see what he's done. He was like my family. He was a migrant to our country relatively recently. But to me, absolutely, that is what I would like to aspire my country to be, is Ahmed's bravery. So without taking this conversation away from the Horn of Africa, away from the heroes of Somalia, of Puntland, of all of your countries, I want to just acknowledge him. So today we have two amazing lecturers, professors who are going to share their expertise with us. Uh, I think a lot of you already know them. I've already started to see acknowledgements and thanks and welcome in the chat. So we have Professor Ronan Gunanatra, Professor of Security Studies at the Nanyang Technical University in Singapore. Professor Ryan was the one to establish the International Centre of Political Violence and Terrorism Research at the university there, and has been somebody that has dedicated his life both as a very high-level academic, but also as a practitioner who has visited for decades many regions in Africa, but also globally. So bringing an incredible substance. And alongside him, we have Professor Dr. Emeka from Nigeria, who again, he's a fellow at the Defense College in Nigeria. The two of them have collaborated on a recent publication that I recommend to all of you, and that's the Handbook on Terrorism in Africa. That was published this year, and it's a follow-up edition to works that Professor Rohan has already published in the past on the Middle East, I think in 2022, and on the Asia Pacific back in 2016. So as a series, really showing how some of the challenges that we face have developed, how our approaches to trying to combat terrorism have developed. And so really worth looking at those three volumes together when we're sitting here trying to find ways forward in the challenges being faced in Africa at the moment. I want to make one small comment before I'm going to hand over to Professor Rohan, and that's really just to talk a little bit that it's 20, 25 years since terrorism took on a whole new life, if you like, a whole new profile internationally. And that was around the 9/11 attacks in the US. And I think one of the challenges that we've had, and one that I hope we as a community can start to tackle, is because that was a very US-centric attack. A lot of the international security architecture that we've built over the last 20 years has been focused on protecting against those sorts of spectacular attacks. So it was 9/11, it was major train attacks in Spain and in the UK. It was the Bataclan music attack in Paris. And there's been a lot of success in the last 25 years in being better prepared for that kind of thing. What we've been much less successful at is how do we combat terrorist and extremist groups in areas where they control territory and populations. And that is very classically the situation in the Sahel, the situation in parts of the Horn of Africa. It's what we saw play out in Afghanistan. And that is a whole nother level of complexity that we need to try to come to grips with. It's also complicated when The institutions trying to manage those risks are still quite young, often not as resourced as we would like them to be. The terrorist groups have been very adept at manipulating our financial systems in those situations as well. So I hope we can also put a real focus on how do we manage those kinds of challenges as opposed to the more one-off spectacular attack that we've made great progress on. With that, I'm going to hand over to Professor Rohan, and with many thanks and much respect for coming to speak to us. Please unmute yourself. I can immediately share your presentation if that is what works.
Natasha, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, let me begin my presentation by sharing with you that I'm very delighted that all of you are able to participate in the workshop on counterterrorism in Africa. Let me say that Africa is already, the African continent is already the epicenter of global terrorism. So if one looks at the terrorist attacks in Asia, in the Middle East, in Latin America, or in the West, most of terrorism, what we are witnessing, is coming from Africa. So Africa is today the number one continent or the region where there is terrorism. There's no dispute about it because the University of Maryland in the United States, they have a center called START, S-T-A-R-T. And according to the START Center, the threat of terrorism in Africa is the highest. And what I'm very sad about the threat is that in the coming decade, the threat of terrorism will grow in Africa. So Africa will become like the Middle East that we witnessed in the past, where terrorism will become the number one national security threat. It's already becoming that, but certainly there's a very significant escalation. So how did this happen? The ideological extremism and the operational terrorism shifted from the Middle East to Africa. It also moved to Asia, but the Asian governments were better prepared. The Asian leaders were better prepared to fight this wave of terrorism. It is because Asia already fought terrorism over many years and they have built the structures and the capabilities. But with regard to Africa, we have not seen that. The African structures, with the exception of North Africa, that is Egypt, Tunisia, Morocco, Libya, Algeria, those countries in what you call the Maghreb region, the other countries are very new to terrorism. So it took like 30 years for the countries in the Maghreb to build the capabilities to fight. And I believe that in the other parts of Africa that I'm going to discuss with you in this presentation, it will also take a long time. It is because Africa lacks visionary leaders. Africa doesn't have smart leaders who are holding high office. I recently met with many of the foreign ministers of Africa, and I was somewhat disappointed that they didn't take the threat of terrorism seriously. So I would say that it is so important for all of you to better understand what is the threat and brief your government leaders on what needs to be done. So I thought that we will have this workshop today and tomorrow, And next year, we will have a counter-terrorism summit, Africa, for 2026 to raise specialist understanding of African leaders. The problem is political leaders because they have political agendas. They don't have national agendas. So until and unless they develop national agendas, Africa will suffer. I'm not a politician and I'm not afraid of politicians. So I speak what I have seen and what I have witnessed. I first traveled in Africa when I was 16 years old. My father took me to the Sahara. And in 1978, 79, 80, and 81, I explored Africa. I was only 16 years old. So I've seen a lot of Africa. I also traveled extensively in Africa, in Nigeria, in Algeria, in Egypt, in Uganda, in Tanzania, in Somaliland. And I also spent time in Mombasa training the counterterrorism community there to do the terrorist rehabilitation. And I spent quite a lot of time debriefing Al-Shabaab members. So I speak to you based on my experience about Africa, which is now more than 30 years, 30, 40 years. So let me share with you that major transnational groups like Al-Qaeda and Islamic State or ISIS, they are now active. And they're exploiting the instability, the poverty, and the weak governance of Africa. And of course, they are mounting very frequently, very intense attacks. Natasha, can we go to slide number 1? So, what we have seen in slide number 2 and slide number 3, please. Okay, so this is a map of how the threat groups are organized. I want to give you a very quick snapshot. There were 18,900 fatalities in Africa in 2024. That is last year. I didn't include Sudan because in Sudan, the death toll is like 100,000 every year. So Sudan is, of course, a different type of conflict. But again, because Sudan is an insurgency, we have moved away from terrorism and become insurgency. So if you don't address terrorism, you will have insurgency. And of course, it will take a long time to restore normalcy in the Sudan. Sudan is a very important region because that is where bin Laden lived from 91 to 96. And I wrote the first book on Al-Qaeda before 9/11. And Columbia University Press and many other presses around the world published editions of that book. And in that book, I explained how bin Laden arrived in Khartoum, Sudan, and he was hosted by Hassan al-Turabi of the Muslim Brotherhood and General Omar Bashir, and how he provided training to groups in Africa. So in many ways, Sudan became the Afghanistan of Africa. But let's quickly go to the next slide so that I can explain to you about the different theaters of terrorism. So I have identified a total of 5 theaters. I would say that the 6th theater is now emerging, but let me focus a little bit on each of the theaters. So Al-Shabaab had 2023, it had 23,000 fatalities. It's a very high fatality rate. And Al-Shabaab is an affiliate of Al-Qaeda. And we have seen that Al-Shabaab will control Somalia for a very long time because there's no real African commitment to dismantle this group. And I think that every African country, every African leader should provide resources to fight the threat in Somalia. Rather than wallowing in the periphery, they must touch the center and dismantle this group completely. I believe it can be done. It will require very significant coordination and resources, but mostly the resource it needs is leadership. It needs greater understanding on the part of the African leaders. Al Shabaab is the most active group. I know the group very well because I've interviewed a very large number of Al Shabaab members, including foreign fighters, including a British foreign fighter who served in the ranks of Al Shabaab. So I want to share with you that in the Horn of Africa, Al Shabaab operates in Somalia and, of course, Puntland, which is one of the regions of Somalia. ISIS is very active. I was very disappointed that there wasn't enough capability in given to the Puntland forces to dismantle the ISIS network. So again, it's a question of leadership and it's a question of resources. Unfortunately, we witnessed very recently a brigadier general who was killed in in Puntland. And I personally believe that it is important to protect those who are fighting this threat. And if we don't protect them, we will suffer more losses. So we have to provide better training, better quality training, provide them better equipment, and get the best experts and the specialists to advise them. The second theater is 55% of the violence in the Sahel, and that is theater two, which is where Jenim is operating, and also the Islamic State of Greater Sahara. One is, of course, Al Qaeda affiliate, other is ISIS affiliate. And I want to also share with you that there is a theater three, which is the Lake Chad Basin, where my colleague, Dr. Emeka, is going to speak extensively on the Lake Chad Basin. So I'm not going to speak much about it, but I want to tell you that the fourth theater of operation is the Central Africa. And of course, from Central Africa, the threat has now cascaded and moved to Southern Africa and Mozambique, and they are now on the coast of Africa. So it is not only the developments in Somalia that will destabilize the Red Sea shipping and the Indian Ocean shipping, but also if the threat escalates further and they take control of the islands on the eastern edge of Africa, certainly it will affect the entire region. Let me also share with you the fifth theater, which is the North African theater or the Maghreb theater, which I'm most familiar with because I travel to almost all the countries there. So there are key drivers of threat, but there's nothing more important today in the conflict zones to build the military capabilities, intelligence led military capabilities to fight relentlessly to dismantle groups like Jenim, like ISIS, and like Al Qaeda, and like Al Shabaab. There should be no fear of doing that. But in areas where the threat has not spread so significantly, where the operational structures have not yet been built, certainly we have to address the marginalization of youth that makes them vulnerable to recruitment by extremist groups. It is because the biggest game changer in the last 10 years is social media. And youth are spending more time on social media. And because of that, they are very vulnerable. So we have to hold the tech companies accountable, especially Meta. And if they don't take extremist content down, we should build the laws to find them and even prosecute their executives. So I ask all representatives of governments who are here, create a legal and policy framework, create the laws, the legislation to fight online falsehoods and manipulations, but also build the laws to ensure that you are able to take very decisive action against those tech companies that continue to maintain extremist videos, audios, photos, and propaganda. Another is, of course, weak governance and corruption. So, if you want to win the fight, build good governance, go from good to great. That is why I've always advocated all of you study at the best universities. And if you couldn't do it, send your children to Oxford, Cambridge, Harvard, or the equivalent of those universities in other countries, so that they will come back and they will be real leaders of Africa, the new generation leaders, where they will establish presence and accountability, and they will fight corruption, and they will fight against insurgency and terrorism without a fear. So another challenge of Africa is the nexus between terrorism and organized crime. And we have seen how the terrorists and the extremists are exploiting drugs, natural resources, doing kidnapping for ransom, and smuggling weapons. Then, of course, there are long-standing grievances, and we have to address them. We have to produce war fighters in this generation, but we also have to produce a generation of negotiators and mediators and peacemakers. So I ask my African colleagues here, when you make your budget, devote a part of your budget for discussion, dialogue, negotiation, mediation, resolution of conflicts. Let me also go to the next slide and share with you that African nations must work with international partners. You cannot fight this battle by yourself. You think you can, because that is the pride of every African. But certainly, the Americans and the Europeans are 20 and 10 years ahead of you in the fight. The Chinese and Russians are certainly 20 years behind the Americans in the fight. They don't have the counter-terrorism specialist capabilities to fight. So I believe that you must work with countries that have the capabilities. The French are remarkable. The Americans are the best. The British are excellent. Australians are also very good. So it is those countries that have the experience and the expertise to fight. They know how to map the threat landscape, and they know how to do the targeting very effectively. They also know how to integrate development assistance with counterterrorism operations. Both are equally important. Otherwise, the extremists will exploit those opportunities and expand. So there are a number of regional forces that I have listed, and there are a number of international cooperation. And what is really lacking is we need a holistic approach. And let me now quickly move to North Africa. And when it comes to North Africa, the terrorism first emerged in Egypt. From Egypt, it spread. There was a terrorist group called the Muslim Brotherhood that is provided the foundational ideology for Al-Qaeda and ISIS. It is the ideology that has brought so much of instability in the world. So if you have Muslim Brotherhood officers in your country, shut it down and take immediate action against their leaders. Have zero tolerance against this group. It will only destroy your country. It will only damage your country. It will only take your country back, because you can't mix religion and politics. And this ideology of Muslim Brotherhood emerged in 1928, and today it has infected and driven all the other terrorist groups. I wouldn't go into greater detail, but I want to share with you that two spin-offs of Muslim Brotherhood. One is the Egyptian Islamic Jihad and the Islamic group of Egypt, Al-Gama al-Islami al-Masri, Al-Jihad al-Islami al-Masri. Those are the Arabic terms. These two groups, they moved to Pakistan and then to Afghanistan, and they fought against the Soviets. And they were joined by youth from Tunisia, Morocco, Libya, Algeria, and other countries in North Africa. And when those youth returned back to their countries, they wanted to topple the established governments. And after returning to their own countries, when they were being hunted down, they all moved to Sudan. And they lived in Sudan from 91 to 96 with bin Laden. Osama bin Laden was hosted by a very well educated man called Hassan al Turabi. He's from the Muslim Brotherhood, but he's extremist. You can see he's giving a nice smile in the photograph. But he only damaged that country. And today, much of what is happening to Sudan is a result of his ideology. So don't entertain this ideology because it will also damage your country. And many of the terrorists in the Maghreb countries travel to Sudan, such as the Armed Islamic Group or the GIA and its GIA 2.10 version that is called the GSPC, the Salafi Group for Call and Combat. It was led by Hatib Hassan, by Hassan, and after him a new group emerged called HOAIP, that is Al Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, and this group cascaded further south from the Maghreb into the Sahel. That is how the Sahel region was infected. Niger, Chad, Mali, Mauritania, and it went up to Nigeria. So I want all of you to know that Al Qaeda led this effort in Africa because bin Laden was being hunted down by Benazir Bhutto of Pakistan. And then bin Laden came in his private plane to Sudan, and he created two farms called the Damascene and the Soba farm. I have written about this extensively in my book Inside Al Qaeda, published in 2002 by Columbia University Press. And I want you to know that bin Laden also built the road from Khartoum to Port Sudan. So he did development, but at night he was a terrorist. And he also tried to assassinate Mubarak in Addis Ababa when he went. So I want you to know that Sudan was Africa's Afghanistan. And of course, it is Hassan al-Turabi and General Omar Bashir who created this foundation for them to operate. Let me very quickly move to the next slide and share with you bin Laden working with Ayman al-Zawahiri, who is also from the Muslim Brotherhood, a breakaway faction, Egyptian Islamic Jihad. They established something called the World Islamic Front against the Jews and the Crusaders in February 1998. And this was in preparation to attack the US embassies in Kenya and Tanzania. This attack injured a very large number of Africans and killed a very large number of Africans in Kenya and Tanzania. It was a suicide attack. And I want you to know that this is the first major attack staged by Al Qaeda in Africa. And Al Qaeda is still there. That is why I said, hunt Al Qaeda down, dismantle it. It's a very vicious ideology. It will ruin the social harmony, the political stability, and the economic prosperity of Africa. Africa will never emerge as a prosperous nation if you allow these groups to function. Wherever they are, create a very capable mobile brigade and a reserve strike force to hunt them. Let me also share with you that the bin Laden, working with Ayman al-Zawahiri, issued a fatwa. Fatwa means a legal decree where they declared war against the Americans, their allies, and their friends in Africa. So they They did many attacks. This is the next slide is the attack in Tanzania, uh, the attack that was staged in East Africa, in Kenya and Tanzania. I visited Kenya. I met with Ambassador Martin Kimani, who was the counter-terrorism ambassador. I also met with the president there, and I met with many leaders of the NCTC, the Counter-Terrorism Center. So I can tell you, based on my experience, that they are doing a good job, but they need to do more than just fighting and protecting Kenya because they have a lot of experience. And I think that they should support and assist other countries more than what they are doing. Even Nigeria, huge capabilities. They should work more with other countries and other partners. Let me go to the next slide and share with you the man who Bin Laden sent to Somalia is this man. His name is Saif al-Adel. He was a colonel from the Egyptian Special Forces, and he went and trained the first group of Somalis that fought against the Americans. So he formed the Al Qaeda's intelligence committee, that is Colonel Saif al Adel. And after bin Laden was killed in Abbottabad in Pakistan by the US Special Operations Forces, what we saw was that Ayman al Zawahiri succeeded him. And after Ayman al Zawahiri was killed in a strike in Kabul, hosted by Taliban, never trust the Taliban. Taliban said, we will not allow terrorists to come, the Doha Agreement. But Ayman al Zawahiri was living in the heart of Afghanistan. And of course, after he was killed, the organization leader is Saif al-Adel, the man who knows Africa very well because he's Egyptian, lived in Sudan, trained terrorists in Somalia. That is what he has done today. He has moved to Iran and he's currently controlled by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps called the IRGC. So he has provided very significant assistance. He sent his own son to Yemen to make a rapprochement between the Houthis, the Houthi movement called Ansarullah, and Al Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. He's a very smart man. And he's currently providing very significant assistance to Al Shabaab. So you can see how Al Shabaab receives assistance from Al Qaeda Central. Let's move to West Africa. This is the most active group in West Africa. It's called JINIM, and it is a group that has expanded very significantly in Mali, and it is threatening not only government, it is also threatening the oil companies. And what we have seen is that this group is controlling very significant territory. In the future, it will control more territory. So, like my colleague Natasha said, we have seen Syria fall into the hands of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, Ahmad al-Shara, known as Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, previously ISIS leader in Syria and later leader of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. Today he became the president. The same way Taliban captured power in Afghanistan. Today you have two countries, one is Somalia and the other is Mali, which is in the hands of these groups. That is why I said you need visionary leaders. Africa desperately needs brilliant leaders who are willing to take the risks and put operations together to free Africa from the curse of terrorism. You can't allow terrorists and extremists to run parts of Africa. Let me just read something what Assimi mentioned. So the Assimi Goita regime during the fuel crisis, right? So what we are seeing is that there is a Mali-based Al-Qaeda branch leader, Bari. He declared economic operators in Mali the modern day version of the enemies who exploit Mali at the expense of its population. The government he charged mishandles fuel, gasoline, and other materials, such as using them to wage war on the people and harm them. Economic operators, including those from fuel and oil companies, are thus participants in the war and essentially declared themselves as enemies of the people, while the civilians who bring salt, sugar, and flour to others in safe operators who deliver fuel are not and will be held accountable, he declared. So JNIM is going to grow in strength and size further. It needs to be addressed. And I also want to tell you that the threat has spread very significantly into other regions. Can we have the next slide? And let me also share with you that they have had very significant success more recently in battle. And this is what we have to stop. Military capability, operational capability is paramount. Intelligence and military units should work very closely with each other. Every terrorist attack, ladies and gentlemen, is an intelligence failure. So we have to build huge intelligence capabilities and integrate the HUMINT with the TechInt. Technical intelligence means SIGINT and other technical branches of intelligence such as imagery, IMINT, VISINT, and other branches so that we will have good quality intelligence, high quality, high grade intelligence to fight. Let's have the next slide, please. This is again JNIM in Mali, what they have done. Let's go to the next slide. And here you can see the photo documentation of their training. In camps in Mali, they have established capabilities. They are operating very openly because there's lack of leadership in Africa. Next slide. And here you can see the group released the video providing exclusive footage of training its fighters in Burkina Faso. So the threat spread to Burkina Faso. If someone tells you there's no such threat, here is the photo documentation. Let's go to the next slide. This is the ISWA, the Islamic State West Africa province. Even Asian terrorists want to join ISWA. So ISWA is now active in Nigeria. That is why President Trump was very concerned. And what is important is that Nigeria should work very closely with the Americans and with the Europeans and other countries to dismantle these structures wherever they are, not only in Nigeria, but in neighboring countries, but of course work in cooperation, collaboration with other countries. Let me very quickly move to the ISWA attacks in North Africa. Here you can see what they have done. And let's go to East Africa, the region that we are in. Let's look at the first slide. Let me tell you that this is the groups that are operating in East Africa, but I want to tell you that there are two very important developments. One is the strengthening of Al-Shabaab because of the assistance from Al-Qaeda. But in parallel, a group has emerged called the Islamic State East Africa Province. I have examined some of the findings. They have more than 60 passports of foreign terrorist fighters, including one from Malaysia. The head of the medical wing of the Islamic State East Africa Province is a Malaysian doctor. And the next slide. Here, this is Al-Qaeda in Somalia. They've captured one of the soldiers, a Ugandan soldier who was captured. There are others who are in captivity. You have to protect your own men. And it is important to ensure that they are released, either through diplomacy or through military force, because that is the only way to maintain the capabilities that you have. And don't take risk with your troops There are so many technical capabilities you can use to fight terrorism. You don't have to deploy on the ground if there's a very high risk. Next slide. This is the media propaganda. So media is something that is very much invested by these groups, and it is so important for every African country to create their own media office to rebut this disinformation and misinformation. Media shapes public opinion. If we don't do that, what's going to happen is more African children and youth are going to get radicalized. This is a must, and this is something you can do. You can recruit the most creative African children and youth and ensure that they build the mindset against extremism and terrorism. They become children who love other religions, not only their own faith, because there's no hierarchy in religion. Whether you're a Muslim, whether you're a Christian, whether you're a Buddhist, a Hindu, or a Jew, you are the same. So you must raise the children where they will study other faiths so that they can live and benefit all the great things on earth. Because if you are only following your faith, and if you think that your faith is the best, you will not live as a global citizen. So I think that there must be programs to promote moderation, toleration, and coexistence, and have interreligious dialogues with all religious communities. Have schools where you have children of all religions so that you can live a full life. And that is exactly what Al Qaeda is supposed to. That is exactly what ISIS is supposed to. Next slide. This is Al Qaeda in East Africa. We have seen that Al Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, which is largely Yemen based now, and they are supporting um, the groups such as Al Shabaab and other groups in Africa. So it is important for there to be very good cooperation with the governments in the Middle East to dismantle these structures. Next slide. This is Al Qaeda in East Africa. So we have seen very significant propaganda by this group, and they believe that they want to radicalize more of their followers and members to buy into their ideology. That's why I said we have to create media office in every country and recruit the best minds to do that. Next slide. Let's go to Central Africa. And this is Central Africa. And what we have seen is that the footprint in Central Africa is significant, but ISIS couldn't last for a very long time because the people in Central Africa, they rejected ISIS, but it still maintains some capability, but it largely moved to Mombasa. Next slide. And here you can see how the Vilayat Wasat Ifriqiya, that is the Central Africa province, initially covered activities in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Mozambique, and Uganda. But what happened was that gradually, when it moved to Mozambique, the faction broke away and created their own capability. Next slide. Here you can see from Central Africa, the Islamic State threat moved to Southeast Africa, bordering Indian Ocean, sharing borders with Malawi, Tanzania, Zambia, Zimbabwe, South Africa, and Eswatini, making it a key part of Southern Africa. So how the threat cascaded from the Maghreb to the Sahel, West Africa, East Africa, and now going to Central Africa, and further driving down to the southern parts of Africa. So Central Africa province pledged allegiance to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi's successor, That is the new Caliph Abu Ibrahim al-Hishimi al-Qurayshi, November 7, 2019. And since then, how they expanded. Of course, the South Africans were very worried. They sent their best unit, their special forces, to assist the Mozambican security forces against ISIS. So this is a very important lesson for you. One of the greatest successes of fighting terrorism is create more special units, create rangers, create commandos, create long-range reconnaissance teams, create the paratroopers, create elite units. If you can create these elite units, you can fight terrorism, because terrorists is highly motivated ideologically. Why? Because the terrorists have the ideology. They believe that if they die, they are going to get 5 rewards. One is enter paradise, audience with God, forgiven for sins and vices, can take 70 relatives to heaven, and can have 72 women also on earth. I don't think they will get any of those, but that is the ideology that is being propagated by extremist ideologues. So I want you to know that we have to compensate for their ideology and their willingness to kill and die by equipping our elite forces and raising them and training them and guiding them and mentoring them, so that they will instill so much of fear on these groups that they will dissipate. Their leadership will be decapitated and their rank and file will be decimated. So you have to raise specialist units. This is a key lesson we learned from what happened in Mozambique. Next slide. Let me share with you how the threat moved and where a separate capability was created in Mozambique, and how even the threat expanded to several islands in the Indian Ocean, right? And they went up to Bamasi, which is the most prominent. And it's very dangerous, because I traveled to Madagascar. I also traveled to some of the islands very close to Madagascar. I couldn't visit Reunion, but as you know, one of the most famous terrorists came from Comoros and the Reunion. He was in fact in charge of Al Qaeda operations in East Africa. I also went to Mauritius. So this threat will not be just confined to the Red Sea. It will also spill over, and the Indian Ocean itself will come under terrorist control unless government leaders act now. Next slide, please. This is the Islamic State capability that was developed in the DRC. Again, a very tragic conflict where Christians were killed in very large number. And what is important is that this slaughter should stop. Every day, there are hundreds of people being killed in Africa by these groups, in the north, in the south, in the east, west, and in the center. Next slide. And this is another slide that demonstrates how they took credit for the slaughter. In November 19, 2025, that is just last month, Islamic State took credit for the slaughter of 22 Christians in 2 separate attacks in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And they issued two communiques, 2 press releases. So this is an ongoing threat, and it has to be addressed as Africa as one. African nations individually can address it, but African nations as a continent should address it. Next slide, please. This is Al Qaeda in Central Africa. This is the most latest issue of Al Naba, and that gives the statistics of the killings in the last 3 months, where they killed 300 civilians in that process. And the next slide. So let me make a concluding remark, and then I will end my presentation for Q&A. And that is, the threat of terrorism in Africa is everyone's responsibility. It is not only the responsibility of the political leaders, but also of the military commanders, the intelligence leaders, and the law enforcement leaders, and community leaders. So I ask all of you to participate to prevent Africa's descent to chaos. Now that Africa has emerged as the global epicenter of terrorism, it is your responsibility to build your own capabilities, work with partners, raise awareness, and build specialist understanding whenever is possible so that we can all work together as Africa and as the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. You've covered an enormous amount of territory there. We've gone from the drivers to the history to the regional breakdowns. The way that we had structured the session was to have questions at the end. We can be flexible to change that if you would like to take one or two now before we move to the next presentation. But I know that the presentations are also very linked. So I'm in your hands, but happy to take one or two really pertinent questions now, but leaving the bulk to the end if that works for you. Yes? We have one hand raised, and we won't take more than one question. That's Kefa. And what I'm looking for everybody at this point is questions. Not so much to give really extended statements, just because we're a little bit short on time. But Kefa, if you can pose your question to the professor, that'd be fantastic.
Thank you so much. Very quick. I actually texted my question, but with this opportunity, I'll use my voice. Thank you so much, Professor, for the eloquent elaboration. My question is I love to just ask, I love to check on the motivation aspect that you presented on the state deconstructive cells. Professor, using the secularization theory by Barry Buzan, do you think the use of military force to neutralize the emergence of these cells actually fuels them in reality? Then my second question, why can the AU suppress these cells as we aspire for United Africa yet suffer the same plague? Thank you so much, Professor.
Thank you very much. It's a very important question. I personally believe that we have to use 10% military force and 90% community engagement. But when the threat is so severe, community engagement will not work. What will work in the conflict zones is the application of intelligence-led military action. But in parallel, certainly we should develop those areas where ideology is spreading or has spread to protect the civilian population so that they will side with the government and will not join extremism and terrorism. Off the battlefield, that is, wherever there is no active fighting, it should be 90% community engagement, meaning building the norms and ethics against extremism and terrorism. So I believe that we have to work very closely with the educational institutions, with the religious institutions, with the infocoms agencies, that is the media, especially digital platforms, to shape the narrative so that we will create an environment that is very hostile to extremism and terrorism. Thank you very much. Thank you, Natasha.
No, that was a great answer. And I think one of the things that has really come out as you've been going through the continental description is that we really are looking at so many different types of terrorism, so many different scales of intervention. And so that balance between, as you talked about, the very high-end special forces approach compared to the preventative approach, and where they intersect and need to be happening at the same time, is one of the biggest challenges that we have. I'm just giving a little bit of a heads up to Isaac and Abdi that the next presentation I cannot download it. So if one of you can download that presentation and drive it, that will be really, really helpful. It just came a little bit late into the system, I'm afraid. I'm going to, sorry, I took the other hands down, but I'd like people to really think about those kind of dynamics as they pose. No, and I'm keeping the hands down. And how we might look to design specific responses in our different theatres, because there isn't going to be one response. I mean, Prof, one of the things I would have to come back to, having absorbed that presentation with all of the richness that it has, there's nowhere that we could say we've been particularly successful, even when we've come in with huge investments. I spent a lot of time in Afghanistan when we had more than 300,000 national troops and 150,000 international troops. We weren't able to make that into a successful campaign. And I think you and I could find lots of reasons why that wasn't coordinated and designed in a way that works. But I think it's just really important to keep in mind that there isn't a single country that has all of the answers. So the expertise that we have across the African continent have to be partnered very closely with the expertise coming internationally, whether it's from very upskilled, equipped countries, or coming from countries that have had much more simplistic approaches. So I thought that was a really interesting thing to come out of all of the talk that you had. Now I'm going to ask that we bring Professor online to give this second presentation. Emeka, Professor Emeka, can I see you? Yes, I can see you. So you are with us. Isaac and Abdi are going to share your presentation. So just to remind people, we have the professor coming from the Defense College in Nigeria. He's going to really give us some great insights into his region. And again, for those of you that came in a little bit late, both Professor Rowan and Professor Emeka are the authors of the recently published Handbook of Terrorism in Africa. And that's one that I really encourage you to keep online. Isaac, are we good to start sharing? And Professor Emeka, please, can you unmute yourself and we can make a start into this second presentation? You see the presentations coming up. Fantastic. Thank you so much, guys.
All right. Thank you very much. Are you hearing me?
Yes, we have you loud and clear. We don't have your picture, but as you wish.
You don't have my picture?
No.
Okay. You should become happy now.
We have your presentation, but we don't have your face.
That is serious. I've been trying to log on, put on my face, but it's not going.
I saw you coming upside down at one point.
Yes.
You have two channels. One, there's no picture. The second one, you have your picture. You can see you. I can see.
I think I want to use that. I want to use that second channel.
Yeah.
Which channel?
You need to only be logged in on one.
Yeah, you should be logging on one, because now the one that I was seeing your video is off now. Yeah, I can see your video now. Yeah.
Okay.
Then you need to put the other one off.
So your video is now with you've just unmuted it.
Yes.
Am I good to go?
Yes, but you still have double channel, which is echoing.
Oh,
You can
right.
log out of the second one.
Yes.
Yes. I've done that.
Great.
Yeah, it's okay now.
Yeah.
So you need to unmute.
Okay, yes.
Perfect.
All right. Now, I've been tasked to focus on terrorism and insurgency in the Sahel. Threats and responses. Before I go into this, let me start by expressing my appreciation to the Horn Institute for Peace and Security for making this workshop seminar possible. And also to say that I share the bulk of what Ron said previously. Africa has become the new epicenter of global terrorism. Is not in doubt that the Sahel, which is the thrust of my engagement, has, but in the past couple of years, the countries in the Sahel have been ranking high among the terrorism most impacted countries in the world. Now, having made these observations, I'll start my presentation by two very, very significant statements. One, by the incumbent AU Commissioner for Political Affairs, Peace and Security, Ambassador Bankola Adioye. Speaking to the UN Security Council in January this year, I just saw a message now. Let me switch off something. Hello, are you hearing me now?
We're hearing you now, but we have a split.
Okay.
No, wait. You're split, so we have your picture on one system and your voice on the other system, so it's impossible not to have some feedback. If it's possible for you to actually close down one of the systems, it will make it easier for the audience.
Maybe I'll present without my picture.
Yeah, fantastic.
I think I'll present without my picture. Let's hope it's going to be better now. Now, looking at this, looking at this statement, just last year alone, the EU Center Counter-Terrorism reported 3,400 incidents, of which about 13,000 people were killed. This is for the whole of Africa. And even prior to that, the Sahel had been receiving increasing attention that the UN Secretary General had to state sometime 2 years ago that the security in West Africa and the Sahel represent a global threat. And if nothing is done, the effects of terrorism and violent terrorism and organized crime in that region will be felt beyond the region. No doubt that among the first countries that rank high in the last published global terrorism index, Burkina Faso, Mali, Nigeria, Niger are from the Sahel. First, fourth, fifth, sixth. Now, where is the Sahel? So the thrust of my engagement now is to leave East Africa, leave Central Africa, leave the Lake Chad Basin, and focus on the Sahel. But interestingly, there is a link between the Sahel and Lake Chad Basin because Niger, Chad, which are in the Lake Chad Basin, and even in the Central African Republic, which is also a member of the Charting Commission, is also in the Sahel. So interestingly, I proceed by giving a kind of geostrategic background of the Sahel. One is that if you look at it from the east to west, the countries in the Sahel run from Senegal, involving Eritrea, the Gambia, North Africa, and part of the Maghreb. The Sahel runs on a belt. There are some countries in coastal West Africa, some countries in North Africa and the Maghreb fall within the Sahel up to East Africa with Eritrea in mind. So these countries are Burkina Faso, Cameroon, Chad, Eritrea, the Gambia, Mauritania, Mali, Niger, Nigeria, Senegal, and Sudan. But my concern now, I will focus mainly on Central Sahel with emphasis on Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. Now, central to all these things is the nature of geography. The Sahel countries also have a link with the Great Sahara Desert. That is mostly arid land. Despite there are some rivers like Niger, River Nile that flow through those areas, still the bulk of land mass is arid, and the countries lack the capacity to transform this arid land into arable land for agriculture. The climate is harsh. There are challenges of climate change such that desert encroachment is ripe, dwindling of Lake Chad is ripe, and this has implications, new pressures on the population. Hello, are you hearing me? Okay, great. Okay. So the consequence, again, another consequence is what? Food insecurity. And this food insecurity is deepened by violent conflicts, of which terrorism is key to it. So the population are facing environmental hazards, they are facing food insecurity, and are facing violent conflicts. And this weaken the population, even get them more vulnerable to extremist radicalization and recruitment. Hello? Now, before I forget, and before I go too far, I have some critical reasonings, some critical deduction. When I look at the Sahel, at times I struggle not to weep. I struggle not to weep because when we cry of terrorism in Sahel, I still recognize that there have been so many efforts at national level, at regional level, at international level with strategic partners to address this terrorist call in Sahel. And the efforts fail to achieve the objective. And one begins to wonder, over the years that there have been series of interaction between some strategic partners, France, European Union, even United Nations, the US in the Sahel, why they've not been able to achieve the objective. France introduced Operation Bargain, that was G5 Sahel, joint force to train local forces. There have been this Trans-Sahel partnership driven by the US for over a decade. And see, this the Trans-Saharan Sahel initiative the partnership could not even help to mitigate or contain the scourge of terrorism in those areas. And the objective of building capacity of the states calls for concern. I wonder if political leadership of this country could not adequately or maximize this partnership. Because if you look at it carefully, in June, Israel and Iran had the 12-day war. And at the critical points, Israel and US invited US to go and bomb Iran's nuclear assets. I wonder if African leaders in the Sahel know about this problem and they have adequate intelligence or revolving intelligence on the terrorist menace here. And in Niger, the US was not just there. US had a military base in Agadez, in Niamey. MINUSMA was based in Kidal, in Mali. Kidal. France had base in Mali and across in Gao, in Niger, as well as Burkina Faso. And yet, after all these years in these areas, what happened? The terrorists were gathering momentum. Audacious attacks were being launched on the states. Is it that the partners, the strategic partners, the foreign partners are being deceptive, or they are pursuing other interests besides what the African state needs, or the African countries, African government themselves are not leveraging massively on this? And like Israel, telling them where to strike. I don't know. Now, ECOWAS again has its own blame in this problem, because ECOWAS appears more concerned with pursuing democracy and good governance in principle, leaving behind the existential realities, threats confronting these states. ECOWAS has for decades been talking about ECOWAS standby force. Countries, ECOWAS also has protocol, non-aggression protocol, protocol on mutual assistance in defense, adopted in 1981. And while these countries were struggling, being stretched out by a terrorist incursion in the region, ECOWAS was reluctant to deploy the ECOWAS standby force, or even get those countries to encourage them. But at the moment, the defense and security agencies got fed up, because when there is a governance failure and some of these terrorist counter-state groups are taking advantage of the governance failure, you see them, the government deploy defense and security agencies to go and crush it. But then it's difficult. It's not every time you use military to engage governance problems. So why the democratically elected government, we are busy deploying military there, the military are getting fed up because they feel that France is here, US is here, and there's no more there's no much you are getting from at the end. Because I want all the intelligence the US base in Niger was gathering, who were benefiting from it. And they are getting fed up. And the elites, some of them are well educated, who also feel they have capacity to what? Control the government. And when they push out the democratic elected government, you find the ECOWAS intervening. We know the effect of that to resurgence of coups and counter-coups, which even went on to deepen the problem, because with the size of coup, US, European Union, France, ECOWAS, they have their own protocols and they have their own zero tolerance for unconstitutional change of government. And with the resurgence of coup, you find out that some of these strategic partners say withdrawing their military engagement in the region. What is the consequence? Deepened uncertainty, more insecurity in the region. So you find out that there's a link between the spread of terrorism in the Sahel, a link between the growing apathy of not maximizing the presence of the partners. There's also a nexus linked also to the fact that the government are the various government in the Sahel belt are more concerned with elections than effectively addressing the security challenges or leveraging or maximizing all opportunities at their disposal. And the state groups, the terrorist group, are also leveraging on these gaps for their own interests. Now, considering the nexus between terrorism, insecurity, have been removed. What's going on?
Are you on the slide that you want? You have to let us know
Hello?
when you want to move. Yeah, we can hear
Yes,
you.
we can hear you and we can see your slide.
Are you hearing me?
Yes.
Yes, we're hearing you. And if you want us to
Considering
move
the
the
nexus
slide, tell us.
between terrorism, unconstitutional change of government, I think it's time for other countries that are having the same challenge to wake up and take maximum action to address terrorism before we have further unconstitutional change of government. You could hear just last week we had attempted coup in the Republic for whatever the reason. It shows that the scourge of military intervention is still looming around the region. Now, this leads me to looking at terrorism in the Sahel, which is the core concern of my discourse. There's no doubt that terrorism is a major challenge in Sahel. Secondly, as I said earlier, 5 of the 10 terrorism most impacted countries are in the Sahel. Chad is one, Burkina Faso is one, Mali is one, Nigeria came 6th in the last GTI. Niger came 5th, Mali came 4th, Burkina Faso came 1st, Cameroon came 10th, while Chad came 23rd. So it means that these countries in the Sahel are among the first 25 countries called for concern. Now, why now there are 2 and possibly 3 major counter-state groups? If you are looking at the Central Sahel with Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, you find out that Islamic State in the Sahel province, formerly Islamic State in Greater Sahara, is key. Then the JNIM, Jamaat Nusra Muslim Islam, is another one in the Central Sahel. Then coming towards the Lake Chad Basin, you have the Islamic State in West Africa province, which competes with Boko Haram in breakaway fashion. Initially, Boko Haram placed allegiance to Islamic State in 2015. Later, their internal disputes and the fashion broke out again. And these are the key terrorist group in the Sahel. And before these 3 crystallize, that whole region has been having, especially since the collapse of the Gaddafi regime in Libya, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, the quest for Azawad. So many non-state armed groups came on board. If you look at the slide I move forward, you find from the Iran
Right.
talking about the Islamic group operation like North Africa into Sahel, Northern Mali, and occupied there for a long time. The Islamic group aligned itself and formed the Islamic Maghreb. Now, there have also been the Harakat Ansarudin, which also aligns with Al Qaeda and comprised of many of the former fighters in pro-Gaddafi Libya. We have the Sanas and Blood Battalion, established by Mukhtar Ben Mukhtar. We have other ones like Islamic State, Mujao, Movement for Unity and Justice, or for Oneness in the Sahel. The MNLI, National Movement for Liberation of Azawad. This one, we are mostly Tuareg fighters that left Libya and came into West Africa and started demanding for independence of state of Azawad to be cut down from part of southern Nigeria, Mali, and Niger. The armed Rabitum, these groups have been existing in the whole theater area, but by 2015, 2027, as currently, these groups have crystallized into 2 main groups, the Islamic State in Sahel province and the JNIM. You see the map showing some of these things.
Next slide.
All right.
Yeah.
My face. Okay. Is my face visible now?
Yes,
Yeah,
we
yes.
have your face.
Oh, good. Don't mind me. Now, as you can see on the slides, the region has been a kind of fertile ground for many of these extremist groups to thrive. But all the various ethnic groups have now crystallized into the three I've just mentioned now. Is ISWAP, ISSP, and the JNIM. Fueling the activities of these groups is what illegal artisanal mining that is going on in parts of Mali, going on in parts of Niger, going on in parts of Burkina Faso. There's also illicit transnational trafficking, drugs, arms, kidnapping for ransom, smuggling, and then there is the issue of financial networks, cash flows, all interacting to help sustain the scourge of terrorism. And some of the kidnap up to the fact that as much as 10 million, 18 million have been paid for ransom to free hostages held by the Islamist group. And this gives them financial enablement to acquire logistics for the operation and then expand their grip, maintain their members. Now, the real areas, literally every part of Israel is threatened. I won't talk much about Lake Chad today, because tomorrow I'll focus on Lake Chad Basin. But for today, we are going to look at the key area that the JNM and ISSP focus on is the tri-border area, Liptako-Gruma, Tilaberi-Liptako-Gruma tri-border area, linking Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali. Besides this, even the capital of these streets of these countries, Niamey, Ouagadougou, you remember the attack on Fendi Hotel in Ouagadougou, attack on in blue in Bamako, in the heart of Bamako, other areas like Mopti region in Mali, Segu, Menaka region, these areas have been invaded. Agadis, elites in Niger have been attacked. Right Dablo and Kodogu areas of so have been attacked by all these groups. And recently, Mali had a very serious problem with fuel blockade mounted by terrorist groups, such that fuel, since Mali, these countries are landlocked, fuel coming from the coastal states, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana to Mali, we are blocked. Over 100 tankers were born, and Bamako was the country was literally crippled through this kind of irregular warfare mounted by the terrorist groups. In fact, leveraging on the Sahel Alliance, the Global Accord, Sahel Alliance by three alliance confederation of the Sahel states, Niger has to take about 20 days to move petroleum products to Mali to ease the problem, the blockade. Then the next challenge is that as the terrorists are mounting attack on these countries, you find out that the coastal states, which appear somewhat immune from Sahel, are also being threatened, because for some time now, the northern frontiers of those coastal states like Benin, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, and Togo have been encroached by these terrorist groups in the Sahel. Encroach, one, for attacks. Two, even when they are not attacking, they are using these coastal states for logistics, to get their logistics supply through, and also for medication. When some of their members are injured, they come. In fact, there was a publication that tended to point at Ghana, frontiers in northern Ghana, as providing base, sanctuary for the terrorists in the Sahel. They cross over, they source the logistics through this coastal state. And at the same time, treat their wounded people in some of the facilities over there. Now, I have a slide talking about some of the attacks or cross-border encroachment in the coastal states since 2022. And it was to prevent this that leaders of Benin, Ghana, Togo, and Cote d'Ivoire earlier in 2017 tried to bring about the Accra Initiative, because as if they foresaw, they strategically reasoned that there could be cross-border violation penetrating their northern frontiers. So the Accra Initiative was to forestall that. But now, as the Sahel countries intensify their aggression on the terrorist groups, they are looking for new areas. And these places have been violated. But by 2024, over 500 violent extremist incidents have occurred within 50 kilometers of the shared border areas in the Sahel and the coastal states.
Well, we're already over time, so can you be a little bit focused, because we're already over time and we want to make sure there's some chance for questions. So just try to be really focused on this last couple of slides to get your main points. Yes, I'm telling you, we're going over time already.
Okay,
so
okay.
I need you to be focused.
With counter-terrorism responses. And now, to show it, there have been series of counter-terrorism responses at both national level and regional level. Even international level. At national level, these countries decide using their defense and security forces to engage the terrorists. They've also introduced basic laws to strengthen the operation, and even volunteers from like the volunteer for defense of homeland in Burkina Faso for defense of farmers. But my interest now comes down to regional level, international level, and the Sahel Alliance, because it was the failure of the regional and international support that made these three countries to withdraw. But you can see, as I said earlier, these countries' frustration by the military make them to overthrow established civilian government and even military government that appeared not to be doing what in Mali, that appeared not to be delivering. And when ECOWAS mounted intensified pressure on them to democratize, and with emphasis on the case in Mali, when ECOWAS insisted that the post-elected Muhammad Bazoum must be restored back, the three Sahel countries, knowing the external implication of probably invasion, and invasion would be most probably be against ECOWAS protocol on non-aggression adopted in 1978. Pulled out in September 2023 to adopted the Global Accord in September 2023, and leveraging on that Global Accord, they now pulled that in January 2024 from the ECOWAS, forming the Alliance of Sahel States, which later by July 2024 metamorphosed into the Confederation of Sahel States. And within that Confederation of Sahel States, they now talk about what? Mutual collaboration. And one of them is support given to Mali to avert the consequences of the petrol embargo, the petrol blockade caused by the Islamists. Now, all this international cooperation, you can see Operation Barkhane, Group 5 Sahel Joint Task Force, the Wagner Group, Russian are in the region supporting, but still, these countries are becoming being ravaged. European Union even brought up Takuba Force, which is Takuba meaning sword, which is supposed to help to build capacity of the states to counter the terrorists. I talked about previously, I mentioned about US base in Niger, which appear not to be yielding fruit. And even the MINUSMA, United Nations Multi-Dimensional Integrated Stabilization Mission in Mali, was present on ground, and the terrorists were ravaging the country. So you could see why they leveraged on they came together to unite among themselves to address perceived threats and work in concert with those that are willing to support them. And anybody that trying to mount undue pressure on them, they try to break diplomatic link with those countries.
We need you to go
So
to the
for me
conclusion.
now, considering all these
We
challenges,
need you to finish.
time.
Professor, we need you to finish.
Okay, I'm in the last slide. It's time to reduce the impact on confidence building mechanism that we roll back the Sahel. Ghana initiated that. Ghana initiated it because the president of Ghana, Mahama, has appointed a special envoy to Sahel, Larry Babloleti, and have been leveraging on professional and other social networking he had built over the years to reach out to these countries and hear their agreement and find way. And it's good that the West African countries have recently agreed that the president of Ghana, Mahama, will be ECOWAS candidate for AU chairmanship by 2027. I believe with this, we renewed engagement by ECOWAS, we renewed engagement by the Sahel countries, trying to avoid circumstances that appear that extracontinental powers against these Sahel countries want to leverage on regional actors to sabotage Sahel states. The more we try to do things that will reduce those mistrust and distrust, the better for the partnership needed, because once Sahel states collapse, the whole of West Africa will be engulfed in more deeper security challenges. Thank you.
Professor, thank you so much. And I'm sorry that we had to rush you a little bit at the end there. But I think what you've brought to the conversation is really highlighting that we have technical responses and we have political responses. And particularly in the Sahel, that diversity of focus and diversity of objective that wasn't able to harness the great resources when we had them and at the same time led us to a state of distrust is such a powerful lesson for the rest of the continent to learn, that we need to bring technical responses to the challenges and a genuine political response, which again, both you and Professor Rohan have talked about that political leadership. So thank you so much for bringing that and highlighting the cycle. I thought it was also really interesting when you started to speak a little bit about some of the financial lines that the groups have and how they can exploit that. And it really brings to mind that yes, every situation is going to be unique, but all of the groups learn from each other, and that's a global phenomenon that goes beyond ideology. So if you look at how the Taliban controlled all of the trade routes into Afghanistan in the 2 years before the fall of the government, it's not a dissimilar tactic to what we see happening in Mali with the fuel. So those kinds of lessons learned and agility that the terrorist groups have is something that we need to try and find a way forward on as well. So thank you so much for that. I think some of the conversation on the littoral states and where the risk is something that we'll probably come on to again tomorrow. Really quickly, though, I want to move on to some of the questions. And I'll do a mixture of things that were already written down and things that and hands as we can find them. So I think let me put 2 or 3 questions and ask first Professor Rohan to respond to the ones that resonate with him, and then you, Professor Emeka, to come in second. Please, can I ask everybody to mute themselves? Please, can you mute yourselves? So I thought there was a really interesting question. I think it was from Professor John, making a link between the jihad of 1804 and current terrorist operations. So if either of you wanted to make a comment on how some of that historical framing is impacting what's happening at the moment. Moving from there to a very current question, we obviously have quite a different US regime at the moment. Still very engaged in counterterrorism globally. So if there are any takeaways on what the current US administration's counterterrorism approach might be, we've got some interest in that. I guess moving a little bit to talking about the littoral states, and this is clearly an issue for a country like Somalia, the security of the sea lines of communication, where the risks and threats come from, and maybe how we can manage some of those issues. And we had and this is the final one before I go back to you, Professor Rohan. Any thoughts on where we are with continental legal frameworks for tackling some of these challenges? We know that there are some global legal frameworks. How well are they flowing down? So, Prof. Rowan, I ask you to come back in first, please.
Natasha, your last question is a very important one because governments must have legitimacy when they fight terrorism and extremism. So, to do that, every country should have a robust counter-terrorism legislation, policies, and then frameworks, and also capabilities and training. So, I personally believe that our counterterrorism policy and strategy should be human rights centric. And at the same time, we must develop legislation rapidly enough because the threat is constantly changing. Otherwise, we will be behind. For example, there are many countries that have not understood the impact of the digital landscape, and they still don't have sufficient legislation to manage the digital landscape because there's lack of legislation. They don't have the legislation with regard to foreign interference. They don't have legislation with regard to online falsehoods and manipulations. So I think that there should be a dedicated expertise in Africa to help countries to develop legislation, and very quickly it should have legal eagles who are able to quickly say, look, this is the latest development, and then we have to develop the necessary laws. Without the laws, we can't fight this. With regard to maritime sea lanes, yes, as I presented, the threat is shifting, including to the coast of Africa, both on the east and the west, and also on the north. So I personally believe that we need to build very significant capabilities also in the maritime domain, but this we can do in partnership with other countries, because if we can work together, we will win. Finally, in terms of operational readiness, operational preparedness, World War II was won because Army, Navy, Air Force worked together. Today it is Army, Navy, Air Force, cyber and space. So we have to work together. We have to have joint commanders, combined commanders who understand the integration of these capabilities. So if we don't coordinate, at least between Army, Navy, Air Force, we can't win the fight. Let me respond to one more question that you posed about jihad. The concept of jihad has very significantly changed over years. But what is important is jihad in the first phase was the greater jihad. That is the inner struggle to be a good human being. Today, the concept of jihad has been hijacked by these groups, and they are telling that we have to wage holy war against non-Muslims. So I think that we have to have, every country should have a presidential council of religious leaders, Christians, Muslims, and other leaders who will meet together to address any religious issues and to prevent the exploitation of religion. And the moment religion is misinterpreted, misrepresented by these groups, should issue a fatwa or a statement so that religious extremism will not be entertained. I thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor. And people will see in the chat that one of the members of the Counter-Terrorism Executive Directorate which is really the key United Nations policy and legal framework setter or manager on counterterrorism, has made some great references for people to look at. And to know that that work is very much done hand in glove with the African Union. And there are a lot of conversations within the African Union at the moment that maybe one of the weaknesses of that organization has been, please, can we mute Gideon? One of the challenges has been to make sure that these normative frameworks are linking with bottom-up frameworks as well. So that's national legislations, as the professor has been talking about, but national legislations that the communities also understand. So there's a lot out there. Can I go to Professor Emeka? Do you want to make a couple of comments? I know people will start leaving now, but we're going to keep going as long as we can keep our professors with us.
I'm seeing a question on the jihad here. Somebody, as the Mark is asking, who sustain instability in the Sahel, accelerated trans-African jihadist acts from Atlantic coast to Indian Ocean. And what are the early signals? You can see, if you look at the map I showed here on the Sahel actually runs from its Atlantic coast to the Indian Ocean, to the Red Sea now, which is not far from the Indian Ocean because there's already Islamic State inside in Somalia. So the act already runs, and they are already approaching to this, coming down south. The countries in coastal West Africa, where there is the danger of coming south, the danger is manifesting. So I won't be surprised, since that's already, if you can realize that there was ISIS in Iraq and Syria, and it has come down to Egypt, North Africa, Central Africa, down to Mozambique in Southern Africa. The link between the Atlantic coast to the Indian Ocean is just natural to think that. So the key thing now is how do we prevent it? And as I said, all this suspicion we are doing, that for African solution to African problem, we now decide what is the kind of external intervention support we need. These are very, very key for addressing this challenge. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Professor. I'm going to take just another couple of questions and put them back. We're going to have some time again tomorrow for more questions. So if we don't get to everything, I think what it does is it starts to guide us on the things that people are interested in covering. And I've been really pleased to see so many people, and Mark, I'm looking at you, I guess, in terms of looking at the maritime aspects, the littoral countries and the maritime aspects. So there's a really interesting question in terms of the links across the Red Sea, that very damp border, if you like, between Djibouti and Yemen, linking the Middle East, the Gulf states, and the African continent. How do you see the convergence there and some of the external players that are maybe managing that? Just before I give the professor a chance to respond, I do think that, and this is a prejudice having been a coordinator of a panel of experts, the panel of expert reports that the UN puts out on Yemen and Somalia have some very interesting narratives in terms of what investigatively has been seen to happen across that space. So a good reference to have a look at. Professor, would you mind giving a couple of thoughts on that sort of broader maritime question, but particularly between the Red Sea corridors and the Gulf of Aden?
What we have seen is that Iran has been sponsoring the Houthi movement known as Ansarullah to conduct attacks against shipping. And they have trained, the IRGC has trained Ansarullah. And it is not only Ansarullah, but Iran itself, the IRGC Navy, because Iran has two navies. One is the regular Navy, other is the IRGC Navy. The IRGC Navy also has conducted attacks. So we are in a very fragile environment. And unfortunately, Iran is now providing assistance and capabilities to various groups in Africa. So it is so important for there to be a stock take of Iran's involvement and take appropriate action. The Houthi movement, which is the spearhead or the vanguard, is Ansarullah. This group will be dismantled in 2026 because governments are tired of this organization. So there will be either regime change or this group will be very significantly marginalized in Yemen. They don't deserve to be the ruling government of Yemen because it's heavily involved in terrorism and in providing assistance to extremist and terrorist entities in Africa.
Thank you, Professor, and thank you for highlighting the Houthi government's lack of legitimacy, not only as a terrorist organization, but as a government that does not care for its people. I'm going to pose just a couple of questions, and then I'm going to bring in the Institute's team to see if they have some final questions prior to closing off for the evening. I think there was a really good point made about terrorist financing and anti-money laundering, and exploring the question of, do we need stronger laws? And I would add to that, or is it maybe more of a question of implementation and operationalization of the laws that already exist? Implementing counter-terrorist financing when you don't have a strong financial sector is complicated. So a couple of comments from both of the professors on that. And then there was also a really interesting question. There was a lot of concern after or during the pandemic period about the idea of a virtual caliphate. We've obviously seen a lot happening in the digital space. So a couple of thoughts on what kind of threats the digital space has for us in the coming year or so. Professor Emeka, can I start with you on those two questions?
Okay, let me look at the issue of digital space. The threat is real. And I heard somebody earlier talking about for African countries to build capacity to address the cyber framework. Even the UN is even looking into cyber security and emerging technologies recently. And Nigeria has actually is working towards a policy in that direction. The fact is real. The use of cryptocurrencies to finance terrorism is real. Because even as we are discussing here, the terrorist group also strengthening their own network and their own mechanisms. And the earlier we start tackling this, the better. Whether the threat is real, it is real. So we cannot keep the back in put national requisite national laws and policy instruments and adequate capacity training and logistic framework to engage it should be involved. What's the second question? What's the first question you asked? You asked what's the first one?
So the first one we were talking a little bit more about maritime space.
See, the whole issue of online radicalization is also existing. So we cannot, countries that are evolving cyber security policy and strategies, cyber security have cyber security acts, and other countries are doing so also. So we can't leave a vacuum in that area because these people we are dealing with make leverage on some of these things. Yes, I'm saying you are saying something initially, please.
So we were talking about the financial, the anti-money laundering and the countering of violent extremism was the first question. Then you made a good response already to the digital space.
Yes, and I've been at that. It's interesting. There was something I find difficult here, but Nigeria is fast addressing it, considering the fact that even in the areas we are like Sahel, we are talking about now, what's the part of Africa, we found out that the issue of countering financial terrorism is real. Now, there are so many cultural practices that allows it, that creates room for it to be for religion and custom to be exploited for that. You hear about the Hawala is going on, is going on. Now, the main many of these African countries say are largely informal economy and will have large cash movements. It's real. So the issue of education enlightenment, one thing that Nigeria did sometime in 2022 was the policy on financial inclusion policy, such that it becomes difficult to carry bulk money. Everything is being tracked. You can't get there's some money. Now withdraw above your ATM per day, 20,000 naira from the bank. Unlike before, you draw so much in hundreds of thousands. This comes in handy if countries can embark on policies of financial inclusion. See how they can mop up some of those free acts that will carry about in large quantity to be traceable. The other dimension is some of the policies are in place, but the regulatory agencies, the reporting agencies, how competent are they? Average on these things. I was in Dakar for a meeting on CFT, on the risk to financial terrorism risk in West Africa, and we realized that still many of even the regulatory agencies have inbuilt problems. Now, even investigating
You're just a little bit broken. You're a little bit broken, Professor. So I'm going to go back to Professor Rohan. Sorry about that. It's just the connection's not fantastic. Can I put that to you as well?
Yes. The key operator of the terrorist finance for ISIS is an African, and his name is Abdul Qadir Munim. He's from Somalia. He lived in the United Kingdom for a period of time. Very recently, his wife also spoke, saying that she has no ties with him. Abdul Qadir Munim returned back, worked with Al-Shabaab, later broke away and created Islamic State Somalia. Now he has created Islamic State East Africa province. Abdul Qadir Munim headed the most powerful office of ISIS after the fall of ISIS, and that is the office called the Qarar office, which managed the logistics of ISIS. He ensured that there was a significant transfer of funds using cryptocurrency for many attacks around the world, using Africa as a hub. And we have also seen that one of the attacks he funded was the Abbey Gate bombing, which is the single largest loss of civilians and military personnel in Afghanistan in 2011 when US and Western forces withdrew from Afghanistan. So I believe that we have to train a new generation of counterterrorism finance experts, and I ask Natasha whether she can speak to the African agencies and put together a training program. I also want to congratulate Somali government, especially the Puntland forces. They captured the head of ISIS finance in July 2025. His name is Muhammad Yusuf. And of course, the Americans, they targeted and killed Bilal al-Sudani, who was handling the financial portfolio. But what is important is for us to ensure that terrorist financial infrastructure is mapped and systematically dismantled, whether it is traditional finance, what you call fiat currency, or cryptocurrency, which is the latest development. So this requires significant expertise. I ask all of you to express your interest to participate in a workshop on countering the financing of terrorism, because that is the lifeblood of the terrorist group. When we disrupt that, we can fight it. I'll give you just one example. I traveled to Europe, and the PKK, the Kurdish Workers' Party office was raided, and the Germans took away the carpets, the curtain, the tables, the chairs, and everything in the office, even the drinking cups. and PKK members were very demoralized. So I think that we have to take not only their finance, but their assets, their resources, so that they will no longer work in the rank and the file of terrorist groups. So we need an approach of fighting threat finance, not just disrupting the flow of money. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. And there is, in fact, some incredible work being done in that space, not least in Somalia. So I think we have a lot to learn from the colleagues on the call in New York with CTED to the colleagues in Mogadishu and across the continent. But it is the challenge. When I was managing the panel of experts on Somalia, I had three key target groups that I wanted to feel uncomfortable. One was those that were running the finance, those that were producing the narratives that were taking our young people into an unhappy direction, and of course those that were operational in terms of attacks. We are quite over time. So I'm just going to make a couple of comments to reassure you. I'm sorry with the hands up and some of the questions we haven't got to. But we have two fantastic sessions tomorrow where we're going to be looking at preventing and countering violent extremism, lessons, challenges, and best practices. So that's going to be an opportunity to start talking about some of the questions we haven't got to and expanding on some of the things that have already been said. And Professor Emeka is going to be leading us on that one. We're going to also have the role of security institutions, law enforcement, and civil society in counterterrorism, which Professor Rohan will be leading us on. So again, that's going to get to some of the questions that we haven't managed to cover today. I'm going to just quickly allow if any of the core members of HOAIPS want to make a closing remark. Before I give a couple of closings and some instructions on how we'll manage tomorrow. So I just give you a couple of moments to, if I don't see a hand up or I don't see something written in the chat in the next little moment, then we'll go to the closing. Thanks so much, colleagues. It's just I'm keen to make sure we keep you engaged because the Horn of Africa Institute of Peace and Security are going to be taking forward a whole lot of these themes. These are important people. So I think really briefly, and we'll do a recap tomorrow again, and we're really looking forward to having you all come back with us. And our director wanted me to remind you all that the enthusiastic engagement leads to a certificate of participation as well, because we want to acknowledge the input that everybody's bringing to this. So we've really had such a fantastic look in really a short period of time of the history, particularly the African history. We've had a look at the drivers, the key drivers of what's bringing terrorism and violent extremism into our communities. We've had some great geographic and specific overviews by both Professor Owen and that deep dive from Professor Emeka in terms of what's happening in the Sahel. So I thank them really for that. We look forward to the sessions that we have tomorrow. Also want to remind you that we have sessions coming up on environmental, climatic, security, Nexus issues. So we're going to give you some more details on those tomorrow. We're still very actively building our partnerships so that the thoughts of Professor Rowan and his counterparts can get out there, the thoughts of our own community. We have incredible skills. as I said in the opening, the only way that we're going to make progress against terrorism is if we have our communities involved, if we have our governments involved. We need our military, we need our security expertise, we need the financial expertise. We need people that can look over the horizon, because these issues are not bound either by coastlines or by borders. So this is really very much a community requirement to take things forward. As I said, we have our second session tomorrow. We're going to kick off at 4 p.m. Mogadishu time. So I know that's different for many of you around the place. We have the honour of the SRCC, the Special Representative, the Chairperson of the African Union Commission for Somalia, will join us to make some opening words. And the African Union's engagement in Somalia and fighting against al-Shabaab is one that has got a really rich history that brings, obviously, Somalis into leadership roles, but also many of the neighbouring countries. And then, as I said, we'll have two major sessions on preventing and looking at specific roles. So I, again, thank you. I will give Professor Rowan and Professor Emeka a chance for a final word, and then we'll close the session.
Very much. Thank you very much, Natasha. Ladies and gentlemen, just in conclusion, I want to say that the most important thing is that more than 100 participants gathered today. That demonstrates that Africa is very much in your heart, and you will do your best to prevent the descent of Africa into violence beyond this point, so that we will be able to work together to fight, to ensure that Africa will emerge a prosperous continent in the coming decade, and not a continent of violence and extremism. I know that all of you are leaders, that's why you have come, and I wish each one of you all the very best, and see you tomorrow.
Thanks, Professor. Professor Emeka, just a final closing word would be amazing.
And then, I'm also delighted that over 100 people, at the point as 124, tuned in for this engagement. And the questions posed, I was busy going through the questions. It shows that there are genuine interest and concern on the threat of terrorism in Africa. Together, we work together to see how power can build capacity African states and various discuss. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Emeka.
Thank you so much to both of our presenters. I'm going to close it there. And again, sorry to keep everybody on mute, but we really do have some security issues when people unmute. So it's not trying to silence people. We're just trying to manage the safety for everybody. Thank you. Thank you so much. And we will look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. So I'm going to close it there. Thanks again.
Thank you, Natasha. Thank you, Natasha, for leading us. Thank you, and we'll see you tomorrow, inshallah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Professor Rohan. Thank you, Dr. Emeka.
Merci beaucoup, tout le monde. Oh man, it's a hectic day.
Thank you everyone for joining. Bye bye.
No, not even done.